Everyone gave up on the millionaire's kids, until the nanny risked everything. The black gates of the Whitmore estate were taller than most men, polished so clean they mirrored the faces of those who dared approach. Every morning, they swung open at precisely 8, ushering in a line of staff who kept the millionaire's world spinning. Chefs, gardeners, maids, drivers, and now one trembling woman clutching a faded leather bag and her resume. Her name was Grace Layton, 32, recently widowed and desperate for work. She had been a teacher once, until the school budget cuts took her livelihood, and fate, ever so cruel, took her husband a month later. When she stood before the tall double doors of the Whitmore mansion, she wasn't looking for comfort. She was looking for survival. What she didn't know was that she was walking straight into a storm no one had been able to calm. Inside, the mansion looked more like a museum than a home. Expensive paintings, grand chandeliers, polished marble floors, but not a trace of laughter. The butler led her down the hall toward the sound of chaos. 2 children screaming at each other over a shattered iPad, a golden retriever barking, and a nanny in tears trying to quit. "Good luck," the woman whispered to Grace as she fled past her. And then Grace met them, the infamous Whitmore children. Ethan, 10, with a face too handsome for his scowl, and Lila, 8, with tear-streaked cheeks and a stubborn tilt of her chin. They were the children of Richard Whitmore, a real estate mogul whose empire stretched across states, and Victoria Whitmore, a former model-turned-socialite, often seen in magazines but rarely in her own home. The children had been raised by strangers, disciplined by none and feared by everyone. Tutors had quit. Nannies had broken down. Their father had given up. "They're unmanageable," the butler warned quietly. "They don't listen to anyone." Grace smiled softly. "Then I won't try to control them," she said. Her first day was a battlefield. Ethan locked himself in his room, throwing things at the door when she knocked. Lila poured juice on the floor, just to see if she'd clean it. The chef sighed and muttered that she'd be gone by Friday. But Grace didn't shout. She didn't scold. She picked up the mop, cleaned the juice, and hummed softly, a tune her late husband used to whistle while fixing the porch swing. The melody lingered in the hall like a ghost of kindness, something the walls hadn't heard in years. That night, when Grace tucked Lila into bed, though the girl protested loudly, she noticed a drawing on the nightstand. 2 stick figures holding hands under a rainbow. Between them, a third figure scribbled out in black crayon. Grace asked gently, "Who's this?" Lila turned away. "No one," she whispered. Grace didn't push. She only said, "You draw beautifully," and kissed the girl's forehead. Lila froze. No one had done that in a long time. Days passed. Grace worked quietly, patiently. She didn't fight the children's tantrums. She disarmed them. When Ethan refused to eat dinner, she sat beside him and began telling a story about her husband, a soldier who once saved a stray dog in a war zone because every life deserves kindness. Ethan pretended not to listen, but when she left, the plate was empty. Still, the Whitmore parents were unimpressed. "If they're quiet, it's because they're plotting," Victoria said coldly, sipping her wine. Richard barely looked up from his phone. Grace wanted to tell them what she saw, the loneliness in their children's eyes, the craving for attention hidden beneath defiance, but she knew they wouldn't hear it. They were too busy chasing wealth to notice what they were losing. Weeks later, something changed. Grace found Ethan outside, sitting on the steps with his backpack open. Inside was a picture of his mother torn in half. He was trying to tape it back together. "It doesn't fit," he muttered. Grace sat beside him and said softly, "Sometimes things break in ways we can't fix, but that doesn't mean we can't love them anyway." His lip trembled, and for the first time he didn't pull away when she put an arm around him. That evening, the storm broke. Victoria and Richard returned home in the middle of an argument, accusations flying about time, money, and betrayal. The children hid in the hallway watching their parents shout. Grace stepped in quietly, shielding them. "Please," she said, voice steady, "not in front of the kids." Victoria spun on her, furious. "You're the nanny. Stay out of this." Grace met her gaze calmly. "Then be their mother," she said. "Just for 5 minutes." The room fell silent. Richard walked out. Victoria followed, slamming the door. The next morning, Victoria fired her. Grace packed her things with trembling hands, blinking back tears. She had grown attached to those children, their pain, their potential. When she walked toward the gate, Lila ran after her, clutching a small folded paper. "Don't go," she begged. Grace knelt, brushing the girl's hair back. "Sometimes love means leaving," she whispered. "But I'll always be with you here." She tapped Lila's chest. Then she left. 2 days later, chaos returned. Ethan got into a fight at school. Lila stopped eating. The house fell into silence again. Victoria sat alone one night, scrolling through her phone when she saw a video notification from the school. It was a clip of Ethan standing up in front of his class for a show and tell. He held a small photo of Grace, the nanny. "She taught me that being strong isn't about yelling or breaking stuff," he said, voice shaking. "It's about being kind when it's hard." The class clapped. Victoria covered her mouth, tears streaming for the first time in years. She realized then what Grace had done, the unthinkable. She hadn't disciplined the children with punishment or fear. She had loved them, unconditionally. The next morning, Victoria drove to Grace's small apartment downtown. When Grace opened the door, she looked startled. "Mrs. Whitmore," she said softly. Victoria didn't speak. She just pulled her into a hug. "Please," she whispered, "come home." Grace returned, not as a nanny, but as a friend. The mansion changed after that. Laughter began to echo down the halls. Ethan and Lila learned to cook with Grace in the kitchen. Richard started coming home early. Victoria began tucking her children in herself. Grace never asked for more money or recognition. She just gave her time, her warmth, her heart. One evening, as the family sat watching the sunset over their acres of land, Victoria turned to Grace and said, "I used to think wealth was measured by what we own. You taught me it's who we hold." Years later, when Grace passed away quietly in her sleep, the Whitmore children, grown and successful, stood at her graveside with tears streaming down their faces. Ethan placed a drawing on her grave, the same one Lila had made years ago, only now the blacked-out figure was replaced with a smiling woman in the middle. "She wasn't just our nanny," he whispered. "She was the one who made us a family." And in that moment, as the sun broke through the clouds, it was as if the world itself paused to honor one simple truth. Sometimes the richest people aren't those who have everything. They're the ones who give their hearts away freely.